Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
So to get started, I wanted to just ask you about how LinkedIn got founded.
So let's see. I'll give this, even though I know we're compact on time, I'll give the slightly longer answer because it's entertaining. So in September of 2000, Peter Thiel, Max Levchin, Luke Nozick, and I did an offsite at my grandparents' house in Gualala, California, where we were like, okay, how do we save PayPal? Because in August of 2000, we burned $12 million in 1 month without any revenue with an exponentiating cost line. And that worked out. Fortunately, that was day one. Day two was, if this blows up, we will have created a mushroom cloud of 200 million plus in venture capital going to zero. And so, we might as well do something together. So we pitched each other our best ideas. And an earlier version of LinkedIn was one of them for me. And then day three, we went for a hike, and then day four, we got back to work. And then what happened is we sold PayPal to eBay in October of 2002. And Silicon Valley had gone crazy then, which is they'd basically concluded that consumer internet, the classic pattern for investing, or in the last few decades, had been you have one big tech wave, and everyone runs out to get the big companies in those tech waves, and then that tech wave goes away, and there's a new one, whether it's networking equipment, medical stuff, or enterprise software, or clean tech, or anything else. And everyone concluded consumer internet was over, right? So they'd said Amazon, Google, eBay, Yahoo, these are it, that we were done. Now it's a new wave. And what I'd realized was, actually, in fact, the consumer internet was just starting. And in fact, the social platforms were kind of a key thing. And so I said, well, actually, in fact, the LinkedIn idea still works. So as opposed to taking a year off, I took 3 weeks off and then started working on LinkedIn.
What about that idea, about the particular idea of LinkedIn, made you sure, or at least highly convicted enough that it was going to work in this world where everyone had given up on consumer internet?
I actually think that if you have at the back of the napkin stage, if you have a high conviction that's going to work, you're mostly deluding yourself. But self-delusion is a positive attribute in many entrepreneurial circumstances. And so for me, it was, I tend to think in terms of economic ecosystems, so like how the world should be. Now, frequently, a mistake in plans is, well, if all hundreds of millions of people are using it, then this product will be awesome. And the real question is, how do you get the first million to use it? Right? Because if you don't get the first million, then the hundreds of millions never happens. Now, that being said, it's like, okay, everyone should have a public professional identity. That should all be open and transparent. That should be a platform by which you navigate how you work and your work life. That should exist. And there are a bunch of cultural things against it. There's a bunch of people just kind of, when you explain that idea, even today, they scratch their head and go, oh, I didn't really think about it that way. Right? And so what gave me conviction was, because there was a lot less noise back then, that one could start an idea like this where most people, even today, don't really fully understand how to use the tool, then you could slowly build and ramp to that, which is much harder in an environment where it's noisy and tons of things are happening.
How did you get the first million or even the first 1,000 users for LinkedIn?
So first 1,000 was easy. We just sent out, like, the 13 people who are working at the company at the time kind of sent out invitations. That ended up at a rate of 2,000 per week, which of course is nothing on the consumer internet. Probably the key thing that we innovated, and we were the first people to do this, that then caused the growth curve to change, was upload your address book and see who else you knew was in LinkedIn. Because when we were thinking about what was the problem that people were trying to solve when they showed up, is like, is this an interesting place? Are there interesting people here? Should I be here? Well, one of the primary questions is, who else is here? And so that was the quickest way to do that. And once they went, oh, Sam's here and so forth, then they go, oh, okay, let me invite some other people, let me check this out. And so that essentially changed our growth curve. And without that, we probably wouldn't be here.
When you had that offsite, when PayPal was burning $12 million a month.
And exponentiating. That was 12,000 in August.
Right. And you pitched LinkedIn as your best startup idea. What were Max and Peter's best ideas?
I'm not sure I'm allowed to say. I'll take the fifth at the moment.
All right. You and I were talking a little bit before we started about some of the current myths of Silicon Valley entrepreneurship, and I thought that was really interesting. So maybe you could talk about some of those.
So there's a bunch of memes going around in the Valley in the last 3 to 5 years that I think are actually harmful. So to how you think about these things. So, for example, one of them is, let's start with that actually a open capital market is a good thing for entrepreneurs. And by the way, it's not that it's a terrible thing, but as entrepreneurs, basically, if the problem with an open capital market is they always think about it in terms of just my startup, like me. So, oh, there's a lot more capital, that'll make my job easier. The problem is if you now have, as a function of open capital market, 5x the number of companies competing with you, not just for your actual products, but for talent, right? For relevancy, for breaking signal through the noise and all the rest of it. Actually, in fact, if you do a historical analysis over the last 50 years and you say, when are the majority of the game-changing companies founded, they're actually in downturns because they have enough time to have a ramp, to aggregate a whole bunch of stellar talent around the time that they're starting and so forth. And so actually open capital markets are actually not the ideal time to be starting a company unless you have an idea that you just simply couldn't get finance otherwise. And look, you start the company when you want to start the company. Another myth would be that...
But before we leave that one, what should founders do if they're starting a company in times like these to best counteract that?
Well, so there's 2 or 3 strategies. So one of them is you really have to think about how do you break through the noise, right? So the number of companies that really matter every year is probably between 0 and 5, right, in terms of like the industry changing. So if you look at an audience like this, which is what, 1,400 people, 1,700 people, you say it's an average of 2 founders per company, presume everyone's doing it, you got 850 in the room, right? And that's only the people who are here, let alone everything else. And so the question is how do you break through the noise is a really, really key thing, whether it's financing, talent aggregation, go-to-market, et cetera. So that then becomes a central problem. So one of them is to say, well, do something very contrarian. Do something that is kind of like, not like where people say, well, it's Airbnb, but for dogs, right? Or that kind of thing is not the kind of thing to do generally, right?
It's very rare that those ever become the big companies.
Yes, extremely rare. The second thing would be is to really look where, and this is one of the reasons why both you and I are fans of Peter's question of, what do you believe that other people don't? But look where other people really aren't, right? Like whether it's, hard science, or if it was 2.5 years ago, Bitcoin, et cetera. Those sorts of things where like, no, actually something could be really big here because, by the way, if you end up being right, you end up having access to the talent that's really focused on that. You have a ramp to actually get a whole bunch of stuff and get a big head start from other possible competitive efforts and these sorts of things. And then I think the last is to really focus on being not, while like my earlier comment about self-delusion is, there's one of the paradoxes of entrepreneurship is you do these kind of 2 things that are in contradiction in balance. So one of them is you actually want to have some self-delusion of like, yes, I'm sure I can make it work. On the other hand, you want to be asking yourself every day and every week, is my confidence in this going up or down? And if it's not going up, what do I need to do and learn and pivot in order to have it? And it doesn't have to be that it goes up every week. I mean, PayPal, LinkedIn, we've had weeks. Every valuable startup has weeks and months of Valley of the Shadow, which is, why did I ever think this was a good idea? And so that happens. So the confidence can go down. That's fine. But part of the reason you're asking this question is in order to know what problem do I need to tackle aggressively to think that I'm on the right path.
All right, so back to the myths.
Okay, so like another one frequently tends to be, so entrepreneurs tend to treat financing rounds as a combination of, the highest possible valuation is the most expression of I'm succeeding and or I'm loved and valued, and the absolute most amount of capital, because, why isn't $2 better than $1, kind of thing. Both of those are subtle mistakes. It's not to say that valuation doesn't matter, and it's not to say that the amount of dollars doesn't matter, but let's take the dollars one first. So on the dollars one, the kind of question is frequently what you really want to do is you want to raise more money than you think you need in order to get to a milestone where that milestone makes a very big difference in the company. I have yet to see the company that it's actually, like literally anywhere in all of my experience, where if you raise way too much capital, you actually get ineffective in the way you operate. It changes a certain level of sharpness in the way you think. And so you don't want to go, like if you said, well, I need 10, raising 15 or 20 is fine. Don't raise 50.
The track record of these companies that raise these like $30 million A rounds as their first capital is awful.
Yeah, it's completely, every single one, train wreck, right? And so it's kind of like, yes, I need this amount of money, and I'll give myself some cushion, but that's it. And then I really focus, and the whole team is unilateral. Because one of the problems that happens is not just you as a founder, it's your whole team going, well, we got an extra 20 or 30 in the bank, so it's okay if this month the metrics and our confidence didn't go up. And so we got a lot of time to figure this out. Well, you don't, right? Because the money isn't what actually gives you the time. It's the market is the question of the time.
How much did LinkedIn raise in its first round?
We raised $4.7 million in our Series A.
And was there a particular milestone you were trying to hit with that?
Yes, the particular milestone that we were trying to, because part of what you do in a financing strategy is when you're raising money, and I published the Series B deck at LinkedIn for some of this.
If you have not seen this, Reid published his Series B deck for LinkedIn, and we make all YC founders raising B rounds look at it. You should definitely check it out.
Yeah. So part of what when you're doing this round of financing, you need to be thinking about the next round of financing. And part of that is what conditions, like what range of outcomes can I get to then make that next round of financing work. And for us, it was when we raised our Series A, it was during the time of Friendster. And so everyone was like, okay, you're kind of like Friendster, but for business, and we don't really get what you are. Well, we wanted to be, as our top goal, which we got to, was we wanted to have clearly established a separate category of professional network from Friendster that we were the market leader in. We actually knew that even though our classic thing is, well, you should have revenue, we said, no, we're going to punt on revenue. We'll do revenue post-Series B, right? They said, well, you should have really, really clear use cases. It's like, well, we should have some, and we, as aware, but we don't have to have them all. We only have to have some of them in terms of how we're, and so it was like, get really focused on this is what we're going to do, because if we didn't solve that problem, no other problem worked. So it was like, which problem really matters that then raises the confidence from us and from the investors, and then we can do a good Series B.
Any other myths you want to talk about before we move on to the next topic?
Let's see, there's a stack. Well, here's one that I think is actually particularly relevant. Since when I'm normally asked, like, what do I invest in? I say networks and marketplaces, because those are the kinds of things that I know very, very well, and I think there's still a ton of opportunity in them. However, one of the things that people frequently think is network equals network effect, right? They say, if it's a network, and I can describe it as a network, it has a network effect. That's actually not true, right, in terms of a tautology, an equation statement. And the reason is precisely what makes something as a network effect is the more nodes that you have in the system, in this case usually people, that it raises the value of the system in a super linear value proposition that then makes leaving more and more, like, oh, this is the place I do this. This is really where it's valuable to do that. Marketplaces are I think, the clearest example of this, because essentially it's like, well, if I'm offering this kind of good for sale or for rent or anything else, and all the buyers who are looking for the broad distribution of what's possible are coming here, well, you go to where the distribution of buyers are, the buyers go to where the sellers go to where the buyers are, and so it becomes very difficult to trade off in that. I think payments networks can have that. I think social networks can have that. I think there's all, but just because you say I have a network doesn't mean you have a network effect.
I want to talk a little bit about you as an investor, and sort of what you mentioned a few things throughout this, but a founder says, I want Reid Hoffman to invest in my startup. What do you need to get convinced of?
So let's see. It's always a little bit idiosyncratic. So for example, I'm always more interested in the great idea that I haven't thought of. So when I say networks and marketplaces, those are things I'm interested in, but it's really a great entrepreneur with a really fascinating idea. Frequently it's, can it get to the scale of millions to hundreds of millions of people? Does it actually, in fact, when it defines that, does it define a new aspect of human ecosystem that changes individuals' lives and the group's lives in a positive vector? And is it the way the world should be? Then you get to, okay, does the initial plan for how to possibly get a strong shot on that goal work? And is the team and the founders the people that have a good shot at that? That's roughly what the shape of it looks like. And it's the more that like for example, when I started LinkedIn and I went to because you should go to all your smart friends and ask them. When I went to all my smart friends and asked them, they basically 2/3 of them said I was an idiot for starting LinkedIn. It was like, this is a crazy idea that's a good signal, right? And the reason it's a good signal is because if 100% of people think it's good, there's almost always problems that you're not seeing, and that enough other people think it's good too, that the competition pile around it is serious. So I like the fact that you say, why would smart people think this is not a good idea? But actually, in fact, there's something that makes it a good idea even despite that.
What was that with LinkedIn? What did most people think? Why did most people think it was a dumb idea?
Most people thought it was a dumb idea because all the value propositions in LinkedIn are you have to get to a critical mass. And so the question is, you have an invitation product where you have no value proposition until you get to critical mass. So you join LinkedIn, no value,
right.
Other people. Then you invite me, we know each other already, no value for either of us.
Right.
So how do you get to the first 1 million people is the kind of the key thing.
Got it. For two specific examples I want to talk about for investing. Facebook first. Could you talk about how your investment in Facebook happened?
Yeah. So I had tracked Facebook when it was in Boston. I went, ooh, that's a super interesting project. But because I was very busy with LinkedIn, I was like, well, it's in Boston. We'll see how it plays out. And then Sean Parker called me and said, I got this really interesting investment opportunity. Facebook. I'm like, yeah, it's in Boston. I don't know how to help them. So I'm like, no, they're here. They've rented a house. And I was like, oh, that's great. And at the time, yeah, it was maybe a little bit more enthusiastic on that. But at the time, I had been a little beleaguered because I'd gotten a lot of pushback from the investment in Friendster of saying, well, you're trying to have your cake and eat it too, because you're doing two, even though I view social and professional networks to be very different. And one of the things about integrity is it's not only important that you have integrity, but also that you seem to have integrity. Like the substance, the appearance matters as well as the substance. And so I was like, look, I don't want to lead this investment as great as it is and all the rest of the thing. I think Peter should lead the investment, and then I will actually, in fact, follow in. And so
It's a very expensive example of integrity.
I think it's probably one of the most expensive examples of integrity I know, but since Peter's a close friend, it's all good. Right. And so Parker, Zuck, Peter, Matt Kohler, and I met because Matt was working for me at the time at LinkedIn. And we're like, this is, there's a lot that can go wrong with this. It was very early. It was still in some number of colleges, like 10 or 12. It was some small number of colleges. But one of the pieces of conviction that I'd had, which is the reason why I knew that Facebook was awesome even before that specific meeting, was that I knew that social network as a platform was intrinsic. Now, it isn't that I had the idea for how F8 came about and the internal platform. There was a bunch of things I learned from how they were thinking about that. But the notion that your identity and your network is a platform for the apps that transform your life, that was something that I already had. And so once Facebook started saying, look, we're already on track for that, that was it was probably one of the most straightforward investment decisions.
Well, you had been thinking about this since you started a company called The Social Network in 1997,
SocialNet.
right?
Yes, SocialNet.
SocialNet.
Yeah.
Okay. How did that experience, was that why you knew so much? Did that
in part
make you prepared for this investment?
So when I started SocialNet, because at a macro level, what I think of myself as doing is helping found, build, invest in, design human ecosystems using principally, software technology, internet technology as a medium. And so SocialNet had a bunch of errors in it. One of them was not understanding that your distribution has to be organic, right? So organic, virality is a natural organic, SEO is a natural organic. There's a set of these techniques that are natural organic techniques. And it was 6 degrees that actually, when I saw 6 degrees, I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant. That's what we should be doing. And so I'd had the idea of everyone establishing an identity and then having this electronic space transforming their lives. But but I didn't have the concept of a network. I didn't have the concept of real identity. I didn't have the concept of all of these things being fundamental, because when I started SocialNet, it was still cyberspace, right? You go to cyberspace, right? And now it's like, no, this is actually the way we live. This is part of our life. And those are the things that how SocialNet had already had me thinking about this category, but also to recognize which things would work when I got to the second phase.
I saw something from you many, many years ago where you had said that the most important thing Facebook had done that was new and innovative was real identity, separately from everything that had come before. Do you still believe that?
I think real identity was one of the we had been doing real identity too, and Friendster had been doing a version. Real identity is definitely a part of it. The other part of it is that they had gotten, the accidents of it starting was also super useful, was that it got to a high trust and real identity by starting in colleges. Like, I don't think Facebook could have established where it got to if it hadn't started in colleges. Because everyone's like, for example, in early days in Facebook, which of course doesn't happen anymore for obvious reasons, people would post their cell phone numbers to their profiles, right? Because they're like, well, this is a trusted community. Like, no one's there's going to be nothing weird by my posting my cell phone to my profile, and so they would do that. Right? Now that doesn't happen as much anymore for obvious reasons.
Right. And then the other example for an investment you made is, could you talk about how you ended up investing in Zynga?
Yeah. So Facebook launched the F8 platform, and their description was, we're a social utility, it's a social graph, and there's a whole stack of applications built on top of it. Now the question is, which of the applications are going to be most applicable? And also, which are the applications that are going to be, that are essentially going to, because there's always a tension between apps and platform in terms of the primacy to the user. Which apps are going to be the most important ones on the platform? Now, photo sharing was clearly one of them, but Facebook doesn't say, we own that, we're not going to allow anything else in that. And so what are the other ones? Now, the primary one that I thought Facebook was like, oh, this is an unimportant app, it's not what we care about. We care about utility and productivity and a bunch of other things, was games. And the intersection of having Pincus, who is massively creative, right, and is kind of like an idea a minute, kind of like, what about this, what about this, what about this, what about this, which is awesome for this space and games and everything else. And the fact that Facebook was like, hey, yeah, games isn't relevant to us, we don't care about games, gave you an opportunity to build a really serious company on top of it. And so this is the kind of thing, it's a social network, people care about the social experience, how you share entertainment, share connection in kind of lightweight, entertaining ways is one of the things that matters to the users. Pincus and his crew understand virality well within the Facebook platform, and games is actually one of the things that if you innovate in the business model well, you can actually make really interesting cash. And so all of that put it together to making a very straightforward investment.
Why do you think Facebook had such a blind spot around games?
Oh, I think it's, hopefully he doesn't mind me saying this on camera, but I think it's Zuckerberg is not himself a game player. What he's really trying to do is figure out how to make the world more open and transparent, and to actually have efficiency of information and connection and communication flows. And so he thinks a lot about those sorts of things. And so games are kind of like, that's not the kind of thing he does. And so he's like, nah, that doesn't, it's bad, it just doesn't matter, right? And I think that was the primary one that now, obviously, they've seen a lot of the utility of how to build games or the thing the right way, so that's now gotten added into the corpus.
If you were going to start a new company today, any thoughts on what you would start?
Well, since I'm pretty focused on LinkedIn and pretty focused on the investments that I've made at Greylock, I don't spend a lot of time computing that particular question. I do think that people still probably underrate where the ubiquity of everyone having a phone means in terms of networks and marketplaces. Now, that being said, probably 2 years ago, I might have done something in Bitcoin, right?
You think it's too late now?
I don't think it's too late, but it's not a secret anymore, right? Amongst the intelligent folks, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, so you have to have a very angled shot. So if you're showing up saying, I've got another wallet, or I've got another merchant processor, I've got another one of those, the likelihood that that's going to play out well is low.
Do you have high conviction that Bitcoin will be big?
I have high conviction that if Bitcoin isn't zero, it will be big.
That if Bitcoin is not zero?
It's not zero, it will be big.
Got it.
So I think it's a very high beta outcome. Now, I think the most interesting question of all the questions that people ask about Bitcoin is it the first or last cryptocurrency? And what this means is not, of course, because of course there's what is now referred to as, I'm always entertained by how doggy coin becomes Dogecoin, right? These kinds of things. There's a whole stack of these things. And it's very possible because of new, better idea or different ideas and everything else. Now, overall, I think one of the things that's going on with Bitcoin is I think Bitcoin is largely adding more wallets per week than the other coins have in wallets in total, right? So network effects have a kind of a runaway kind of characteristic.
Yeah.
But the question is, first or last cryptocurrency? Last one, super interesting, because there will be interesting cryptocurrencies. First one, right? Well, that's interesting.
All right, closing question since you brought it up earlier. What is one thing that you believe that most other people don't?
So obviously, Peter and I talk about this question a lot. And by the way, it's worth reading Peter's 0 to 1 book. It's, there's a bunch of pretty good things in that. Well, I'd say that there's great thinking, just to respond to that, but there are some things where Peter and I have differences of views on some of the things, but that's great. I mean, that's part of thinking and having, clear, bold, sometimes contrarian thoughts. The key nuance on that question that I have is against which audience, right? Because there's against the world, there's against the US, there's against... Now, I'm going to answer that question against Silicon Valley, because I think there's at least 2 threads that are classically Silicon Valley threads that I have a different point of view on. One of them is the role of government. So basically, Silicon Valley tends to go, oh, government is this large, cruddy, bureaucratic, impossible to deal with thing that you should just run around. And by the way, yes, right? That's not like saying, no, I don't see those things. But it is actually, in fact, what creates the platform environment that we operate in. It's what creates the legal structure, it's what creates the set of services, what creates the educational environment, what creates the financing law, right? There's a whole stack of services that are part of it's like we're fish in an aquarium and we say, who needs water? And you're like, no, the water is important. And by the way, it's important that the water is cleaner than dirtier. It's there's a set of things. And so actually, in fact, I think that there's a set of things that we should be thinking about. How do we help positively impact government? You can imagine the services as as APIs and government as a platform. There can be a whole set of different things, but we are the fish that are in this aquarium, and it is collectively all of our responsibility to make the aquarium better, and it's not just oh, that's a nasty problem, I'm not gonna think about that. Second one, related, is, now, I'm pretty sure that it's difficult to teach entrepreneurship pure out. I think you can teach skills that help with entrepreneurship, and this is one of the things I love about YC. I think entrepreneurship clearly can be learned, right? Now, I think there's always a doing component. Now, that being said, I actually think that government can add things that are positive to entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship is much better in where networks have dense connections. It's another thing that I like about YC is how do you create density of connections to facilitate financing, talent, understanding markets, getting advisors, building the network around the entrepreneurs and the companies. Governments can help facilitate that. There's a bunch of different things that they can do that can say, okay, we will help entrepreneurship. It's not just number of days to formulate a company. It's not just labor laws. It's not just bankruptcy laws and these kinds of. There's, I think, a number of positive things that governments can do also to facilitate entrepreneurship, and those are 2 Contrarian from Silicon Valley.
Great. Thank you so much for coming to spend some time with us.
Thank you.